Will an iPhone app developed on OS 2.2 run on an iPhone with firmware 3.0? The evolution of iPhone firmware and operating systems often raises questions about compatibility and functionality among app developers and users alike. A common inquiry in the tech community concerns whether an iPhone app developed on an older OS version will work seamlessly on a newer firmware. Specifically, will an app developed on OS 2.2 run smoothly on an iPhone that's been updated to firmware 3.0? Understanding iPhone firmware and OS compatibility. To answer this question, it's essential to comprehend how iPhone firmware and the SDK, software development kit, interact. When Apple releases a new firmware version, it typically builds upon the features and capabilities of the previous iterations. Firmware 3.0, introduced by Apple, brought a host of new features and enhancements that advanced the iPhone's functionality. Importantly, these updates were designed to be backward compatible, meaning they generally supported applications developed using older versions of the SDK. Backward compatibility, a key feature. Backward compatibility is a crucial aspect of Apple's approach to firmware updates. This concept allows applications developed on previous OS versions, such as OS 2.2, to run on newer firmware, like 3.0, without requiring modifications. However, while most apps developed on OS 2.2 should operate as expected on firmware 3.0, developers should be mindful of a few considerations. New APIs and features. Firmware 3.0 introduced new APIs, application programming interfaces, and features that weren't available in OS 2.2. Apps relying on a mix of older and newer features might need updating to leverage these new capabilities fully. Deprecation of functions. Although rare, there can be instances where functions or APIs available in older firmware versions are deprecated. It's crucial for developers to review Apple's documentation to ensure their app doesn't rely on any deprecated features. Testing and optimization. Even with backward compatibility, testing apps on the new firmware version is essential to identify any performance issues or bugs that might arise due to the changes in the system environment. Best practices for developers. For developers aiming to maintain and improve app functionality across different firmware versions, a few best practices can ensure seamless user experiences. Regular updates. Continuously updating apps to incorporate both new features and optimize existing code for the latest firmware ensures compatibility and performance. Version checking. Implementing version checking within the app can help manage feature sets effectively, allowing the app to adapt functionalities based on the firmware version it's running on. Thorough testing. Conduct extensive testing on all supported firmware versions during development to catch potential issues early. In conclusion, an iPhone app developed on OS 2.2 is expected to run on firmware 3.0 due to Apple's commitment to backward compatibility. By staying informed about firmware changes and adapting their apps accordingly, developers can ensure that their applications perform optimally on the latest iPhone technology.